But we have to start with the Power Conference program here in the state, here in Lincoln. And Nebraska men's basketball lost 5 straight to close out the regular season. Constantly, every week, it was win this one and you're a near lock to the NCAA tournament. Win this one and you're keeping yourself on the bubble. Win this one and you're in the Big Ten tournament. LLL. Each time did not rise to the challenge. You had different players, it seemed, rose in different ways. Bryce Williams had 43 points just the other night. Juwan Gary goes out on senior day with a hell of a 24 points in 28 minutes. But ultimately, it's a loss to Iowa. And it was a win, and you're in, lose, and you're out situation for both teams. Iowa sneaks in to the Big Ten tournament. Nebraska, because of a 5-way tie for 12th, falls all the way to 16th. 16, 17, and 18, not headed to Indianapolis. Nebraska right there with Penn State and Washington on the outside and just sitting there while 15 of your buddies go hang out in Indianapolis for the week and play basketball. I was at Pinnacle Bank Arena. It was very sad for the last couple of minutes of the game. Nick, I know you were at baseball and handling that, but what you were able to take in, what were your impressions of the basketball game yesterday?
I don't know how you begin this conversation, assessment, analysis, however you want to put it, without using the word disappointment. And that's just everything that Nebraska got to this point of, you're right. We're a week and a half ago thinking, as bad as it was getting, that if you could just beat Ohio State, that, well, first of all, you're in the Big Ten tournament. You prolong those opportunities to qualify for the NCAA tournament as an at-large team. We said this the last time you and I talked on Thursday. It always felt like the committee, I shouldn't say the committee, but the bracketologists wanted any reason to give Nebraska the benefit of the doubt. They just like, well, if they beat Iowa and then they could win maybe on that first day, that Wednesday in the Big Ten tournament, maybe that could be enough. And you and I and other people are probably wondering, really? That's all? So it always seemed like the bracketologists really looked at some of those quad one wins and some of those big wins, especially early on in the season, that could mask some of the deficiencies down the stretch for this Nebraska basketball team. So it's disappointing that with all the emotion that goes into senior day, with all the emotion that you would expect, that sense of urgency where we talked about, where we wanted to see Nebraska play like that team that we kept saying Nebraska was going to be up against, when Nebraska's going to be playing a desperate Ohio State team. Nebraska's going to be playing a desperate Iowa team that are trying to get into the Big Ten tournament. We wanted to see Nebraska be that desperate team. We wanted to see Nebraska have that label on the other team's scouting report. And early on, you're thinking, okay, 9-2, Sammy Hoiberg hits a 3. You're like, all right, this is what it's supposed to look like. And that was just a distant memory. I mean, I think a lot of people who watched that game, because I ended up watching, I don't know why, when I came back home, just because I wanted to see how it went, because we're tracking the game. We had the game on up in the score or up in the press box in baseball, but, you're glancing at it every now and then.
Yeah.
At one point, I'm seeing 9-2. And then just like that, all of a sudden, Iowa's got the lead. And it, up until maybe the last 6 minutes of the first half, it was somewhat tight. But to see everything unfold, I think now that you watch 40 minutes of that basketball game, you forget that Nebraska actually had a 7-point lead right out of the gate. And it seemed like Iowa offensively could do anything they wanted to do. And I go back to disappointment, Kaleb, because if there was one thing that this team seemed to really have an identity with, was their defense, their ability to close out, their ability to rotate, their ability to at least provide some very tough contested shots. Now, give Iowa credit. There was a lot of just catch and shoot moments for them. And those shots were falling. And sometimes those shots are not going to fall. But man, just that part of it defensively to me was more than anything disappointing. Now, we could talk about the inability offensively. See, that's the thing too. I'm not as disappointed with the offense because, Kaleb, we know there's limitations there. And so it's tough to just absolutely go ballistic on the offense. But then you could factor in, okay, there are numerous double teams on Bryce Williams. And Fred even said this after the game, and he's absolutely right. You're in 4-on-3 situations where you've got to be able to create offense that way. When they're taking two guys are taking one guy out, you've got the numbers. How are you not able to be more effective offensively? But unfortunately, that's been the bugaboo of this team.
The expectations were low on offense.
Yeah.
They were low, and there's no doubt about that. Yes, started hot from 3. Hit the first 3 out of 4 because Juwan Gary goes 2 for 2 to open it up, and you're going, oh, awesome, you're hitting from threes. Here's where I was nervous, even with Gary hitting those, is that if Juwan Gary hits 1 to start, he falls in love a little bit. And the team fell in love a little bit. Started out 3 for 4, missed the next 10. And while you're not getting anything offensively, Iowa's offense, on the other end, constant movement, constantly driving into the gaps, kicking it out to somebody, swinging it around. There's always movement. The ball never seemed to get stuck on the Hawkeye end of the floor. How often with Nebraska's offense does the ball just get stuck?
Yeah.
And it's because of its design that there's not a true point guard. There's not somebody breaking it down and kicking it out to shooters constantly. You don't have for as great as what you got from Juwan yesterday, and for what is great as you got for Bryce, especially over the last 2 months. And Connor Essegian actually shot the 3 at a decent clip, and Sam Hoiberg shot the 3 at a decent clip. You just don't have that consistently from everyone across the board. Berke hit a 3 yesterday too. He finally got, a little bit like we talk about the bracketologists wanting Nebraska as a team to show a little bit of a pulse. Berke showed up that he still had a pulse after a not great stretch of games coming back from injury. But it was you just didn't have that entire effort and energy in a must win. You didn't have that feeling of back against the wall, everyone is all in at all points. And you saw that with Nebraska's opponents. You saw it with Minnesota. You saw it with Ohio State. And you saw it with Iowa on what is potentially the final regular season game of Fran McCaffrey's tenure at Iowa. He's playing his way out of Iowa City, but still comes into Lincoln and has it like it was a no-doubter. It wasn't close at the end. You weren't really shooting free throws saying, can we cut into this lead? It was over. And so you compound Sunday where 7 guys walked, 6 seniors, and then a junior, a fourth-year guy in Jeffrey Grace. And so we'll see what happens with the transfer portal. I think he got in yesterday, but going into yesterday, he played 44 minutes over 37 games in 3 years in Lincoln. And Fred Hoiberg has talked about Grace a couple of times, specifically leading into Sunday, where he said that is the voice in the locker room. That is one of the leaders on the team. So we'll see where that leadership there's that part of being part of that team and being that leader, but also, I mean, if you're a competitor, you kind of want to play. So I'm not going to blame any decisions that Jeffrey Grace makes in the next month. I'm not going to be upset with him for any of that. But you have 6 other guys that aren't coming back next year, Nick.
Yeah.
And the transfer portal opens up in 2 weeks. And we still don't know Nebraska's NIT or college basketball crown destination. We'll find that out along with Selection Sunday. But this is a massive, massive offseason for Fred Hoiberg and company, because we'll get ahead of this part. He's not getting fired.
No, and he shouldn't be.
He's coming back. He just had it was overall, you compare where his first 3 years were to his last 3 years, he's coming back. There's that conversation. That's all we need to say about that. So now it turns to, what does the offseason look like? Big, big, big transfer portal and offseason, and you have to have hits this year. You cannot have one hit and half a hit and then a bunch of misses. You got to have hits this year.
And I'm glad you brought up the let's get the cat out of the bag on the whole fire. There's always going to be the fire everybody crowd. Okay. And this is, I think, such a very complex topic when it comes to Nebraska basketball. And for the record, I am 100% with you. Nebraska, in my opinion, still has the right coach. I think there are so many things that Fred represents both as a tactician on the floor, a basketball guy, his demeanor. There are a lot of things that I like about what Fred brings, but also representation of this program as a steward of the athletic department. And I know that maybe doesn't mean a lot to everybody, but there are a lot of things that I think, as far as boxes, that I think Fred checks. Now, I do want, but it's fair. Criticism is fair when things do not go your way, especially when you have a massive collapse down the stretch.
Yes.
Fred's going to be the first one to tell you that it starts with him. Okay. And we understand that. I mean, the head coach, you're the one making the money. You're the one that is pushing all the buttons. You're trying to get the most out of your team. You and I have had this conversation over the last couple of months of, at some point, there's only so much as a coach you could say to your team. And the thing is, we've all seen it with our eyes early in the year. This team had a lot more to offer than what we saw down the stretch. Is that guys running out of gas on this thing? Whatever the issue, the main issue was, I don't think there was just one thing. Mm-hmm. So it is up to Fred. It is up to that coaching staff to figure it out. It is up to them to really go back over how they're identifying talent, how they are able to bring guys in, what type of players are they bringing in. Now, I want to give a big shout out and a lot of credit to Tom Chattel, because if anybody read his column last night about what Troy Dannon, his role in all of this is going to be, and I think anytime you see anything that has to do with Troy Dannon's decision on basketball, people are like, oh, wait, should he fire him? No. And that's not what Tom is writing either. But
yeah,
Tom
decision doesn't always mean a move.
Absolutely. And Troy, I think, does have a very interesting dilemma when it does come to men's basketball. I'll get to this point. I have to go through the weeds on this one a little bit here, because there are varying perspectives when it comes to Nebraska basketball of when they do accomplish even baseline success, that people lose their minds as far as getting excited. And I think we know why. This is still a basketball program in its history that has never won an NCAA tournament game. So when that is the highest bar of success that a program has ever reached, there are tempered expectations, but there's also monumental enthusiasm over some of the smallest accomplishments, or at least, again, baseline success.
Yeah.
When you think of football, even though we are so removed from the national championship years, that's always part of Nebraska football's history. So anything less than a certain amount of, at least a bowl eligibility, people freak out, because that's not what they feel the standard of that program should be. Baseball, to an extent, you see this as well. 2005 was their last College World Series appearance. And even with the switch from the Big 12 to the Big 10, which you and I both know, that's different baseball in the Big 12 compared to the Big 10. People still feel, well, you should be in a position to host every year. You need to be in a super regional every year, when that's not reality. There are challenges that come with it. So now we look at the challenges that are in front of this basketball program, and then where Troy Dannon comes in, and what I thought Tom did a great job of illustrating in his column is, you've got now this shared revenue. You are going to be paying players like everything that remember that FBI scandal when Yahoo Sports broke that with basketball and Adidas and everything going on. All that crap is legal now. I mean, we thought basketball was going to cease to exist. I mean, oh my God, all these programs, these blue bloods, they're going to be given the death penalty. They'll never come back. They're going to have to play Division II basketball. Like, I mean, it was nonsensical. But again, the issues that were going on, this is all legal now. So how is Nebraska, how does Troy Dannon, how does the people he answers to, how do the regions, how does everybody view Nebraska basketball, men's basketball, in the pecking order of the successful programs of what you really want to invest into with NIL, with shared revenue, how you want to go about getting players? Because this was the best point I thought Tom brought up. There's something to say, a little sense of pride when you see a basketball team that maybe what they lack in overall individual explosive offensive talent, man, they're gritty. They roll up the sleeves. They They punch the clock. They bring the lunch pail, whatever other cliche I can throw. And man, that's cool. And they're winning some games by doing that. They got that tough guy mentality, and they're a defensive-minded team. I don't know about you, Caleb, but what excited me the most of when Fred Hoiberg was named the head coach for Nebraska basketball, I think back to those Iowa State teams of George Niang and Naz Long and Matt Thomas, just shooters everywhere. And at any point, they could be down by 12 in a blink of an eye. They're up by 15 because they are just raining down threes and they are creating offense. I don't think of Fred Hoiberg as this defensive, strategist that's his identity. Now, obviously defense and that all travels. We know that. But Tom brought up a good point of maybe the reason that's been their identity is because he has been limited of what he can do when it comes to acquiring talent with what types of resources that they have compared to the peers in the Big Ten. And so you're playing the hand you're dealt right now, and you're trying to create an identity off of that, and you're trying to create a successful identity off of that. Again, the fact that Nebraska, given some of the limitations they had, was still going into that last week as a bubble team. I know we can dwell on the collapse of it, and that shouldn't be ignored. But the fact that they were still there with the limitations, I still think shows some pretty good coaching when it does come to trying to find something that you can. Now, okay, you saw that. You've got to answer the question of what type of ceiling do you want to see Nebraska basketball have? And if you want to see them be that type of team that's an NCAA tournament team 3 out of 5 years, and when they're not, that they're playing in the NIT, they're playing in the postseason, what type of commitment financially are you going to put into that? How much shared revenue is going to go into basketball? Can you shell out some extra dollars to find another Bryce Williams, to find 2 or 3 of those guys? And it costs money. Are you putting in that money? Are you comfortable doing that, especially if that could impact what you put into or what you hold back from, say, football and volleyball? The football, you cannot stop trying to invest into that. And volleyball, look, that's a machine. They've got that rolling. Okay, so is basketball going to be on the higher end of the priority list, or are you okay with as long as you're part of the conversation? And on some selection Sundays, you're going to get the good news, and on other selection Sundays, you're going to get the bad news. But as long as you're part of the conversation, is that good enough for this basketball program, for its fan base? Are they okay from a financial standpoint of putting in the type of money that would give you that result? I guess I would think they're not, but this is now a how do you divvy up the money and give these coaches, especially a very solid, great track record, and we've been around them long enough now to know that Hoiberg's got coaching chops, that there is something to be said about that. He just needs the dudes. Well, how are you going to go about and get the dudes?
And the money is going to be a big part of that.
Yep.
That you have to have that investment. Obviously, part of it from rev share, but also part of it from the NIL outside of what you have that'll be funneled through the university. A couple of quick notes. First of all, 7 Huskers walked on senior day. All of them were transfers. Every single one of them. Even Jeffrey Grace, who's been here for a few years, he started out at Arizona State. All 7 were transfers yesterday. Last year, all 4 were transfers. The year before that, all 3 were transfers. You have to go back to Thorjar Thorbjarnarson for the last Husker to come in and play their entire college career in Lincoln. The last 4-year Americans left in 2019, the final year with Tim Miles. Sam Hoiberg next year is going to be the first 4-year American to play through Nebraska since JPJ.
Yep.
Since 2019. And there were a few guys in that year. So what you're looking at in the transfer, because you only have one high school signee coming in, you have to bring in a bunch of transfers again. That's just the way the program is. And hopefully some of these young guys that are in the program now stick around multiple years, because multiple years is where you get the success. You had multiple years Derek Walker, multiple years Keisei Tominaga, multiple years Juwan Gary, Bryce Williams. And yeah, you mix in some of those others, like Sam Griesel comes in for a year. and he helps immensely with that 1 year. Rick Mast played a big role last year in his 1 year.
And then, by the way, Caleb, sorry to interrupt you. He would have been huge this year. He would have been massive this year.
It would have changed the dynamic because you would have been able to run the offense through a high IQ passing big at the top of the key.
Right.
It just would have that's what worked the last couple of years. You didn't have it this year. Now, when you're going into the transfer portal, you have to replace a lot. 4 of your top 5 in scoring, 5 of the top 6 in rebounding, 3 of the top 4 in assists, 3 of the top 4 in steals, and your top 3 in minutes. There is a lot of room out there to go get somebody. You have Berkay and Rink coming back as bigs. You probably still want to get another big. You're definitely going to want to get can you get a dynamic point guard sometime? Like someone who can score, but also they're going to pass and do really well. And you also need to get an elite scorer. I know Connor Essegian, you're hoping he can take another step and he can hit the 3 at just a high enough clip and be consistent, but you've got to go get like a dude. And I think because there will be a vacuum with so much of this production leaving, I think that might be enticing to someone if the dollar amount is there as well.
And that's what it comes down to. There's no question. And that's why I really appreciated what Tom put out last night is the dollars and cents. You and I have done this too, but everybody that have had the conversations about college athletics and the shared revenue, it's all been about the football conversation. And then what's left over, how do you divvy that up amongst the different sports? And every place is going to be different because they're going to look at their next most successful sport that they have to keep rolling on top of football. And that's going to be different from school to school. Like I mentioned, how many schools are having that conversation about volleyball today? Not many. Nebraska will. Nebraska has to. Yeah, exactly. Nebraska has to because that is a machine. And the type of eyeballs that are now on not only women's sports, but volleyball in particular, and Nebraska is at the forefront of that. You can ill afford to just assume that we can hold a little bit back because now based on just reputation and exposure, that program is going to keep doing what they're doing. No. All that's going to do is create competition around you where people are going to want to take Nebraska down on volleyball. So you have to stay sharp when it comes to the financial part of it.
I'm curious on that, though, Nick, because you haven't had rev share, and Nebraska volleyball has done extremely well with NIL. Mm-hmm. Like I know they were just in an Adidas commercial for International Women's Day. Yep. You had shots from the stadium match, which is always good to see. But you've got, I think, Bergen Riley is got stuff with like Red Bull, and you've seen other players do a lot of these things. Do you think that number, when it comes out of the $20.5 or $22 million, the rev share from the school, that number could actually be pretty low? $1 million or less could potentially be zero, knowing that you do fund NIL for volleyball here really well to where that's going to make up all of the difference. You don't need to dip into where that rev share is coming out of the school.
It's a good question. Now, this would be my counter to that, or at least my, hey, let's keep an eye on this. If, say, Nebraska did hold back from rev share and it was all NIL, which we know is very healthy, especially from Nebraska Crossing, that you would have, if there are teams, like I said, that competition that you think is going to be created because of the exposure of Nebraska volleyball. And look, I know they didn't win a national championship, but they are always going to be expected to be there. It's that competition. I think the way that you try to start taking down Nebraska is by other schools using their own rev share, whatever they can get between NIL and rev share, to get the type of players that they feel are going to be, especially within the Big Ten, that they can feel are going to take down. So I think of teams like Madison and programs like Madison and Wisconsin. I think of State College and Penn State, even up in the Twin Cities in Minnesota, because I think all of them have decisions on how committed they want to be for programs that have had a lot of success. And even if some of it has been a little bit more distant success, been a little bit more traditional power, but also those new teams that come in from the Pac-12 now into the Big Ten. How do they want to invest into that, knowing that Nebraska is the gold standard there? I think they would use at least as much rev share that's going to make sense to all of them. So if that was the case, if Nebraska scaled it back or didn't put as much in right away, and you start seeing other teams creep around them, and all of a sudden there's this big pool of talent where Nebraska maybe is dropping a match or two against teams that they don't typically do it, then I think obviously you have to rethink that, but have you waited too long not to keep that thing rolling? So I think it's a slippery slope. If you what you said is not wrong with the NIL part of it, but there's another financial revenue stream that if you don't at least implement that with volleyball as well, do you run the risk of teams catching you? And once they do, are you able to get right back on top? I don't know if I'd want to do that. That is a slippery slope there too. But after that, though, Kaleb, after volleyball, you start looking at programs that have had variations of success. And I think most schools are going to look at their men's basketball program. Mm-hmm. Is Nebraska are they putting their men's basketball program on a pedestal as to which they will spend competitively like their Big Ten peers? Because in my opinion, you've got the coach. You don't have the up-and-coming mid-major guy anymore. You've got the coach. But there's only so much I think Fred Hoiberg can do, given his offensive background, when you don't get those types of guys, those elite scores at least. And we just said Rink Mass. How different that – I wouldn't say Rink Mass is an elite scorer, but he's a scorer. He provides offense. He's a stretch guy. He can help you inside. He can help you outside. Just having one more guy to take a little bit of the workload off of Bryce Williams, or one more guy that you have to defend honestly, would have made a difference. So it's not like we're asking for Nebraska to spend millions upon millions upon millions of dollars to bring in 5 studs and bring in the Fab Five. No, maybe a guy or two on top of what you have in a player like a Bryce Williams would be everything I think this fan base would want to see, because I think you're finding yourself in the NCAA tournament. Yeah, maybe you're an 8 or 9 seed, but is anybody expecting more than that?
What it comes down to, and it's an open secret, Nebraska got outbid for multiple transfers this last offseason. Mm-hmm. So that's where you get some misses in the transfer portal. What it comes down to is you've got the coach, you've got the infrastructure, meaning the facilities, you have the fan base. It's time for, and this will be the first year with rev share, it's time for the university as a whole and 1890 to be serious about Nebraska men's basketball, to take this program seriously, because so far, it has absolutely not been taken seriously from that financial part in this NIL world. And that makes it kind of ties one hand behind Hoiberg's back. And I know he still has to make the decisions on where the roster is, but if there were 3 different guys he would have rather had last offseason, and not to say we don't like any of the guys who are here as people, or like, it's just, you just know that you didn't get everything you would have liked to get out of all of the transfers. But if you would have flipped out 3 guys from the transfer portal last year, you don't know what the difference is this year. Mm-hmm. You still have Alpha Bryce, and you still have Jawan Gary, and you still have Sam take another step forward. Like, you don't know what the overall difference would have been had the dollars been there.